What I want to feel forever. Yes, so let the beginning. What I want to feel forever. Just the start. Well, howdy, folks. Yes, it is time to start exercise biomechanics. This is the first session, first episode, if you will, of exercise biomechanics. It's an exciting day, virtual day. So we'll hang together this summer. The good news is it's all air conditioned on the inside, nice and cool. There will be a syllabus on Howdy, and then materials will be on eCampus. I'll try to include a copy of the lecture and laboratory syllabi, the course syllabi for the class. So it's going to be, I think, an exciting 5 weeks, a rapid 5 weeks. There's a lot of material to cover. So in this first episode, we're going to talk about a basic introduction, if you will, to the field of biomechanics, what it's about, how it can help us, how we can use the tools of biomechanics to improve daily life, to be able to increase performance, and to understand really better the basis of sports medicine, because it's really based upon biomechanics, especially today. So biomechanics is an applied science, and as an applied science, the purpose is to not only teach us principles, but to provide us with the ability to be able to use those in real life. And so that's going to be a major focus of today's discussion and our integration of how we're going to use this material in the real world. So partly to be able to do that, we have a series of laboratories. Now, the laboratories are usually hands-on, but unfortunately in this environment, we can't be as hands-on as we'd like. So we've developed some alternative strategies. We're going to show you some videos that students and other people have taken and provide you with the means to get that data, to be able to analyze that data. You're going to develop hypotheses based on a number of factors, test those hypotheses. So it's going to be an exciting semester in biomechanics. If you're in the summer group, then again, it's going to move pretty quickly. It's going to be 5 weeks as opposed to 15 weeks. But so welcome aboard. So howdy, this is Exercise Biomechanics, Kinesiology 426. It is, as you see, a 4-hour lecture laboratory class. It is a kind of standard applied science class with 3 contact hours in lecture, technically 3 contact hours in laboratory. It's going to be virtual, so it's going to be a bit different. There are some laboratory reports that you guys are going to be writing throughout the session. We've been able to do that as a group, so you're going to get into groups of anywhere between 3 to 6 individuals. So your TA, and that's going to be Pat Ryan, is going to be working with you guys on that. The lectures in the laboratories are designed to really work together, so they're integrative. This is an integrative discipline and an integrative class. So we're going to get started. Today, we're going to really go over an introduction, what biomechanics is about. On our second session, we're actually going to go over the syllabus briefly, or I might have a short video just related to the syllabus. And then the second part will either complete this introduction or get right into problem solving, because you guys are going to be the applied problem solvers of the future, regardless of what field you go into. So let's get started. There we go. Hopefully you've been anticipating the class. This is one of our dogs. This is, I think, Daisy, even though the coloring looks more like Trixie. So Daisy unfortunately passed on a few months ago. That's my daughter, Amanda. And then some snow from a couple of years ago. Happens occasionally even in Texas. So I'm Dr. John Mahler. I've been here at A&M for quite a while. And I've been teaching Kinesiology 426 and developing the lectures, the laboratories, and a textbook. That's the good news. You're going to have availability to a textbook, and that will be on eCampus. Soon that will be with a publisher. So we're working with that. I don't think we'll have it in time for this particular session, but it will be available really, really soon. I'm really excited about the project. This is a 20-chapter textbook. The good news is, because we designed this textbook to go hand in hand with lectures and laboratory, that we're going to go from chapter 1 all the way to chapter 20 without interruption. That's going to be pretty cool. Pat Ryan is your laboratory assistant in the laboratory sessions. And again, you're going to conduct experiments, science. So really this is about science and applying science, and looking at causal analysis, why stuff happens in the body as a mechanical machine. So we're going to think about the body as a mechanical machine. It has parts just like an airplane or a automobile or truck has. So it has the equivalent of a motor or an engine, a drivetrain that connects things together. We've got wheels just like we have legs in a sense. So this field of exercise biomechanics is relatively a young integrative field, even though many of the principles we talk about go back hundreds of years and maybe even thousands of years for some of them. The old school name for this type of class was a kinesiology class. And some of them were origins and insertion type stuff, but exercise biomechanics as a field integrates mechanics, that's a branch of physics, with anatomy and physiology to talk about function at the whole body level as well as the tissue level. And so we're talking about here, of course, skeletal muscles, bones, tendons, ligaments, cartilage. Basically, that's the human movement system. So to really focus on this notion of applied science and using that applied science, I'm going to go back to where this came from in terms of American higher education, and that's the Morrill Act. So this was a bill that was passed by Congress that was promoted by Justin Morrill. Justin Morrill actually never went to college, but he wanted to make sure that people in every state had the ability to get a really good education in the sciences. And they were focusing mostly on agriculture, mechanical. As many of you know, Texas A&M, the A&M originally stood for agriculture and mechanical, meaning agriculture and in mechanical here, we're talking about engineering. So Texas A&M, engineering is really big, agriculture is really big, military, so the Corps, all of these ingredients basically go into the founding of Texas A&M, as you guys know, in 1876. There was a second Morrill Act in 1890 to make sure that no one was left behind, that more diverse colleges got into the mix. And so many of these are what we call land grant universities. In fact, Texas A&M is a land grant, sea grant, and space grant university. So the land support was provided by the federal and or state government. Part of the reason the Morrill Act came into being was that you guys may recognize this as West Point. So In 1862, the only university that basically had an engineering program was West Point. You guys probably have heard of the Army Corps of Engineers, so that's where that comes from. And with a university like Texas A&M that's big on research, we have Tier 1 power. We're an AAU, American Association uh, universities, like Texas A&M, Rice University, um, Austin, otherwise known as Travis County Community College. So that's the University of Texas. We won't talk about them too much. In fact, Aggies don't talk about them too much at all anymore since we moved to the SEC. So land-grant universities, the whole idea is to research, to explore, to understand better applied sciences and how we can actually use them, and dissemination of that information. So some of it goes to the lay public, some of it goes to farmers, engineers, some of it is debated on in journals and journal articles. So as a Tier 1 university, what we're interested in developing is what we call flexible knowledge, meaning from discrete principles, equations, information, problem solving. You can take that information and those type of strategies and use them. So we think of it as news and training that you can use. So I mentioned a moment or two ago that these type of classes, biomechanics, used to be called kinesiology classes, at least in our discipline. And if you're wondering what that means, or if maybe someone has asked you if you're a kinesiology major, what the heck is that? Well, it comes from two Greek verbs, kine meaning to move, kinematics come from kine, logos means the discourse or study of in a scientific manner. So in essence, kinesiology is the science of movement. And today we usually use that term to describe either divisions, departments, the broader field in which we would have, for example, exercise physiology, this class, which is exercise biomechanics, motor neuroscience or motor learning, motor development, exercise psychology or sports psychology. Those are all involved in this discipline. So it's an integrated discipline, meaning we're going to put things together. It's also applied. We're going to do something with it. And because it's technology driven as an applied science, it means that the technology that we've used to analyze gait, to analyze jumping, to be able to help tissues that have been injured heal better, all of this is critically important because it integrates sports medicine with anatomy and physiology and cell biology and molecular biology and mechanics, puts it all together. So we're working on a new text. We do have a Segan Adams musculoskeletal anatomy book. I call it a coloring book, but it really provides the basic information on which muscles produce which kind of movements. So origins, insertions, which are critical in understanding where a muscle force vector is acting, and then the actions of those muscles, all are important in terms of how we move. So what muscles produce this movement? This is called shoulder abduction. So that would be the supraspinatus and the middle part of the deltoid. As technology and research develop, we've gotten to the point where if we want to replace or help heal an injured tendon, ligament, cartilage, we can use hydrogels. We can even do 3D bioprinting to be able to replace a piece of articular cartilage. And articular cartilage is usually what suffers and degrades with arthritis, whether it's rheumatoid arthritis, gouty arthritis, or osteoarthritis. Okay, so exercise biomechanics is an integrative, applied, pragmatic discipline that merges or integrates anatomy, physiology, mechanics, along with sports medicine, puts it all together so that we can do something with it. So really, no matter what field you're interested in, whether it's teaching, coaching, physical therapy, occupational therapy, medicine, nursing, outdoor education, hospital administration, adult fitness, strength and conditioning, physician's assistant, regardless of research, going into research, regardless of what field you choose, applied pragmatic science is going to be a critical part of it, unless you're doing 3D crystallography in a chemistry laboratory. So there are two things that I think that biomechanics helps with the most, and that's improving or maximizing performance on the field, and then connective tissue and cardiovascular health. And that means rehabilitation, fitness, prevention, etc. Here we see someone with a knee brace, or at least a knee brace prototype. Over the years, they've gotten really good at developing braces that can protect knees against injury or against re-injury. So if you look at a football game and you look at the offensive or defensive linemen, you're going to notice today most of them are wearing a knee brace to avoid that hyperextension and torn ACL that could put them out for the season. Now, with the type of technology we're developing today, one of the things I think we'll see is much faster healing of sports-related injuries in the next 10 to 20 years. We've made great progress in the last 30 to 40 years, but it's going to accelerate in the next 20 years as we're able to add in biologics and medicine that can enhance the ability of exercise to increase the healing process and reduce the time in which we've been injured. So exercise biomechanics as an applied science, it's about cause and effect. A causes B, which causes C. So causal analysis is really important because it helps us to separate reality from wishful thinking, or maybe this works and maybe this doesn't, trial and effect. Cause and effect is a much better way to go. Because everything we're going to be talking about and everything people do related to biomechanics in one sense or another are governed by Newton's laws, the law of gravity, the other laws of physics, and the equations. All of those basically govern. So we have pretty set rules that basically regulate what actually happens. I find a lot of comfort in that, because that means that we can predict what happens. We aren't simply at the whim of something we can't control. So that's the good news. So it means that during rehabilitation after a knee or elbow or shoulder injury, there'll be stages that we can set and we can test and determine your progress as you go along, as we're adding in exercises, stretching, etc., strength, trying to regain what you had before. And in prevention, we can predict how that might reduce the risk of a fracture or a joint injury during a season or while you're basically participating in an activity. And that extra 10, 15, 20% could be the difference between a devastating orthopedic injury and no injury whatsoever. So that's why we want to look at. So with the COVID crisis, many of us have been kind of stowed away either in our office, at home, or room, or inside. Outside's good if you can get there, especially because sun's been out, it's been nice, etc. The weather up to now. I'm recording this at the end of May, so we've had some pretty good weather, I think, in April and May. We even got some rain a couple days ago. So let's take a look at this. Someone got pretty busy outside, and we're going to show you a trick shot. This is sometimes called a Rube Goldberg machine. I don't know if you've ever seen one of those, but let's see what I can do. Hold on. All right, here we go. If you're a basketball fan like I am, this is a bit of fun. He's going to make technically 4 points because he's made a bucket there. But you can see one thing causes another mechanically, We've got all kinds of things acting here. We've got torque, we've got friction, we've got forces, we've got angular velocity, linear velocity, both at the same time. Oh, collision, so we've got impact forces, gravity, momentum, kinetic energy, potential energy turned into kinetic energy. That's a lot of what we see here. Potential energy turning into kinetic energy, the energy of motion. Nice. I wonder how long it took to set this up. One thing causes another. And obviously this was predictable. He knew what was going to happen. That may have taken a while to get it exactly right. Oh, nice. Potential energy going into kinetic energy again. Lots of different energy transfers here, which is exciting. It's one of the cool things about energy. You can always turn one type into another. Friction along with gravity. Nice Hot Wheels track. There's another goal. That's 6 points there. That's the one that needed a lot of practice to get right. Football. Okay, here we go. I think this is the big finale. Potential energy to kinetic energy. Launch it. Here we go. Yes.
Yes!
Okay, so cause and effect. That's what we're really going to try to focus on. And so it means that we tested hypotheses over the years. And in testing hypotheses, that allowed us to be able to determine what's real from what's not. So what is peer reviewed, meaning other scientists review papers, make sure it's up to stuff. A lot of papers that get sent in the journals are rejected. In fact, most of them are rejected. So you do have to pass muster. You do have to demonstrate that what you've collected is reproducible, it's valid, it has value in terms of science. So some of the stuff you might see in the old Joe Weider publications or Charles Atlas back in the day. You guys probably don't remember him. I barely remember him. But in the 20th century, he and P.T. Barnum were probably the biggest ad men of all time back then. So Charles Atlas sold basically an exercise program, a dynamics program that involved, believe it or not, isometric exercises. He was competing with gymnasiums and sold advertisements in Superman, Batman comics, Marvel comics, etc. So in order to compete with gymnasiums of the time, so this is back like in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, etc. He was probably the second most recognized individual after the president of the United States back then. But the thing about advertisement, when it's effective, people tend to remember it. And sometimes remember it long after the ads. And as you probably can guess, with exercise and with nutrition, unfortunately, a lot of claims that get made, as you know, never really have scientific foundation. So a number of myths persist. You may have even heard of some of these myths. Maybe even some of your instructors or professors are still professing them. Unfortunately, there is no scientific evidence behind them. Here's one: lactic acid causes muscle soreness. You ever heard of that? Some people have. Um, Muscle soreness is actually caused by excess calcium and actually damage at the skeletal muscle membrane. There's actually a couple of stages with delayed onset muscle soreness. The first one is a problem with excitation contraction coupling. And the second one is, or the second phase, which takes a day or two, has to do with calcium activating proteins called proteases, which basically digest and eat up actin and myosin, etc. Lactic acid is at the tail end of glycolysis. It can go back and forth through lactate dehydrogenase to produce pyruvate. Pyruvate can be used as a fuel by mitochondria. There's an enzyme called pyruvate dehydrogenase, which turns it into acetyl-CoA, which you may recognize as part of the Krebs cycle. So lactic acid is actually a fuel. Lactate can be used by contracting muscles, believe it or not. Your heart can use lactic acid as fuel. Your brain can. Your brain, in fact, can only use glucose, lactic acid, and ketone bodies. So if you're wondering what the current keto diet craze is about, it's about the fact that the brain can actually use ketone bodies. It does change your pH, and it does shift you away from using carbohydrates. Sometimes that can be a good thing, but sometimes it can also lead to insulin resistance in the long run. Weight training causes people to be, they used to call it muscle bound, inflexibility. That's not true at all. Isometric exercise, dynamic tension can increase strength throughout the full range of motion. That's not true at all either. So these were just marketing myths. None of them have any scientific foundation. So instead, what we want to be able to focus on is the real deal: science, research, using technology to try to better ourselves. So exercising for health, that's really critical, because we know now that sedentary lifestyle contributes to increased risk of most chronic diseases. So thereby, physical activity, exercise, reduces the risk of chronic diseases. And as we've done more research, we're starting to know what we call the mechanisms, how it works. Just like you saw with the Rube Goldberg machine. Each ball or each component of that entire contraption was contributing from a causal perspective to an effect downstream that caused a ball to move or another object to move. So type 2 diabetes, obesity, heart disease, Alzheimer's, cancer, hypertension, all of them are basically inflammatory diseases that involve some oxidative stress. So the fingerprint of these diseases overlaps with, in a sense, the gene expression fingerprint for sedentary lifestyle, meaning what genes get expressed or which ones get turned on and turned off. So because they kind of overlap, that enhances the risk of those chronic diseases. And because humans have genes of hunter-gatherers and a few farmer genes built in, some aggie genes, that means we're adapted, bioengineered, if you will, for activity to procure food. So that means that daily activity is critically important in terms of maintaining our health. So I'm just going to give you a few examples of some proteins that are altered by exercise training. So many of them act in different parts of the body. Some of them act in many different tissues in the body. Exercise, for example, can modify proteins called NADPH oxidase. That's a family of enzymes that produces free radicals. They're actually important in regulating blood flow, in regulating glucose uptake. We think they modify strength during skeletal muscle contractions, but it's one of these enzymes you got to keep in the Goldilocks zone. So when people become sedentary for too long, there's too much of this NADPH oxidase. So it goes from wearing a white hat to a black hat. Nitric oxide synthase is a family of enzymes that produces nitric oxide. So nitric oxide, we know today, is a critical second messenger. It's as important as calcium is as a second messenger. So second messenger just means kind of a middleman that takes information from either related to mechanical stress, oxidative stress, metabolic stress, heat stress, whatever, and communicates with cells to try to optimize production of proteins as well as function. So nitric oxide synthase, one of the cool things that it does is it dilates blood vessels and lets blood flow increase. One type of nitric oxide synthase is important in the immune system. So today with the COVID virus, that would be an important part of the immune system. The immune system, like NADPH oxidase, you want it in the Goldilocks zone as well. Not too high, not too low. So that's one of the challenges, I think, in dealing with pandemics as well as kind of everyday infections. So nitric oxide synthase in skeletal muscle and connective tissue can increase protein synthesis. It can also contribute, believe it or not, into atrophy of muscles and possibly bone. As I mentioned, it regulates blood flow by dilating smooth muscle in arteries and arterioles. In the brain, there is a brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. So when people exercise, this would be under the category of what I would call growth factors. Most growth factors have the name growth factor in them. BDNF technically doesn't have that. But growth factors usually can enhance protein synthesis, improve function. So BDNF, for example, works on the hippocampus in the brain, and the fly went by, as the old book said. So I got a fly in here now. And if you hear something behind me, that's Trixie. Trixie's one of our dogs. She's at my foot now. She may act up later at some point. So you'll get to see her from time to time. During the lecture, she kind of comes and goes. So nitric oxide synthase regulates a lot of different stuff. Oh, glucose uptake. I think I forgot to mention that. BDNF, it works on the hypothalamus, and that increases memory, so you can remember more stuff, which will be important. Other growth factors like insulin-like growth factor, this one increases protein synthesis in muscles, bones, tendons, ligaments, probably cartilage as well. And it would be critically important, for example, during the healing and rehabilitation process, as well as the exercise adaptation process. So we're going to talk about the syllabus next time. So in terms of scoring a really good grade, we'll go into this in a bit more detail, but it's basically kind of daily study, how to do well. Well, watch the lectures, attending the equivalent of attending class. Some of the formulas and standard units, you need to kind of commit them to memory. Study on a nightly basis, prepare for the laboratories. One of the things we're going to do is we're going to have weekly open sessions and then a weekly quiz where you'll get a chance to basically kind of test your knowledge, practice, practice, practice at all times. There's Allen Iverson and that old meme. It is about practice. So be prepared, be persistent, professional, passionate, and positive. Your own independent work. The grades lately have been pretty good. I've seen them improving. Part of that is I think that we've improved our technology over the last decade. I think the focus of the students has been really good despite all of the problems we've had with COVID, etc. So I expect that people will be able to handle a class, even though it's challenging, especially in the summer. There's a lot going on, no question about it. So you got to keep up, hang in there. So as I said, exercise biomechanics is a young discipline. We're going to put together some physics, some engineering, believe it or not, exercise, sports medicine, rehabilitation, lots of stuff's going to go into it. It's a young discipline really because of the technology. It was very, very difficult to collect a sufficient amount of data with film and other types of analysis before there were computer interfaces, before we had a lot of progress in cell and molecular biology, so we could understand how tendons, ligaments, cartilage worked. Back in the day, we didn't understand that. And even in the 1980s, we were so far behind the research and the literature in terms of sports medicine and what we were doing. But that changed. About 1985 is, I think, the threshold and part of that first revolution in sports medicine or in biomechanics. Course content is originally based on the American Alliance for Physical Education, Recreation, and Dance, AFERD group. So you guys have probably heard of the AFERD group, the main group that's involved in kinesiology overall. The American College of Sports Medicine is kind of the research end of it. AFERD is really the applied end of things. So this is the course description. This is an integrative mechanistic, meaning cause and effect, study of biomechanics of human motion during physical activity and exercise, biology and mechanical principles of the human body, including bones, tendons, ligaments, cartilage, muscles, joints, and whole body mechanisms are investigated. So in terms of how we're going to approach biomechanics in the course, we're actually going to start with whole body biomechanics. And leading up to that, we're going to go over the major reference systems. So there's an anatomical reference system, there's a linear reference system, there's an angular reference system. We're going to go over all three. And then we're going to start applying that information in terms of kinematics, and that's a descriptive analysis of movement that involves velocity, acceleration. Then kinetics, which involves force, torque, power, that's the causal part. So this is the cause, kinetics. The effect is what happens, kinematics. Exercise applications, lots of those related to injury, rehabilitation, prevention, health. We'll talk about some ergonomics as well. Then we go into tissue mechanics during the last probably 40% of the class. We'll talk about mechanical properties, things like strength, stiffness, energy absorption, how we actually measure those. Measurement is going to be the key to understanding biomechanics and thinking about that, as it is with any science. So with tissue biomechanics, we're going to talk about how the individual components work: muscles, bones, tendons, ligaments, cartilage. Trixie is, and the fly, I think, have had an interaction. Oh boy. Well, I knew it would start early. So we will talk about skeletal muscle. In fact, in terms of the order of information, we're going to actually look at skeletal muscle before we look at connective tissue, bones, tendons, ligaments, cartilage. But the rules that kind of govern them, you're going to see are fairly similar. We have a chapter on what I call mechanotransduction, and that's how cells detect changes in forces and mechanical stress that determine whether a bone or a tendon or a ligament or a muscle increases in size, hypertrophies, and increases in strength and toughness and stiffness, etc. So we'll get a chance to talk about muscles as well as connective tissues and apply it. So in terms of applying mechanical action of movement in the body and how joints move, it's really all about torque, whether we're running, playing football, lifting weights, etc. Johnny Football back in the day. It's all about producing torque, producing that spiral on the football. And that's produced through rotation of the shoulder, the elbow, wrist, etc. To do that, we have to introduce an off-center force that can produce rotation. So whether it is a frisbee that you're throwing, you're basically putting a spin on something by producing a force away from the middle or the center of mass of the object. Watch out, Trixie. Trixie's thinking about biting the frisbee. Technology use, that is the key. And you guys are going to get to use a lot of the technology that researchers use in biomechanics. So we have kind of teaching and research grade equipment That's going to allow us to do digital video analysis. We've got computers, we've got software for doing analysis. We got a few things that we've taped, for example, related to mechanical or material properties. So we're going to combine some classic mechanics, some engineering concepts, and some cool tools. So that's what it's all about. You're going to get to use stuff like this: force plates, force mats. We've got Cybex machines. We've got digital video cameras. It's hands-on. In the summer, you guys are going to get a chance to actually look at some things that we filmed over the years. This is a Tendodyne system that you see here on the upper left, and that produces, or that measures, power production. That's really important in terms of ballistic movements, whether we're lifting a weight or jumping or throwing. We need power for sure. We have a high-speed digital video camera, a JVC. We'll probably buy another one sometime in the near future. This is a force and pressure plate, which can produce images like this and look at hot spots when people are walking. So for example, when you're walking or running, when you land, you're going to see a lot of pressure on the heel, and then a lot of pressure on the ball of the foot, and sometimes the big toe. We do have a Biodex machine set up that can measure torque in lots of different joints in the body. Could be the ankle, the knee, the hip joint, shoulder, elbow, etc. We got digital video systems. Here we see someone getting ready to jump up and spike a volleyball. Watch how they crouch down. Check that out, where they get that big flexion of the knee and the hip joint. We don't want to say bending in this class. A bending force is going to cause a change in shape of the object. That's actually a bending force. Hopefully that doesn't happen to your knee joint or shoulder or elbow. When they move, they're going to move through rotation. So rotation about an axis, just like a wheel turning in a truck or a car. Okay, so technology is what it's all about. When we want to make sure that this gymnast doesn't get a joint sprain, or doesn't have a risk of a fracture to the femur or tibia, we can measure what we call the material properties of a bone or tendon or ligament or cartilage. There's a machine called an Instron machine. We've done research for many, many years and looked at the effects of exercise and injury and aging and rehabilitation and long-term sedentary lifestyle, and what it means on the material properties of parts in the body. We can do some movement analysis using digital video cameras. So this is all dependent on the ability to use technology. So technology and biomechanics go hand in hand. That's one of the exciting things about it, is technology improves, our knowledge improves in biomechanics. In fact, it's accelerating now. Folks in kinesiology, as well as researchers in biomedical engineering and in medicine, are doing a lot of the research today, particularly on bones, tendons, ligaments, and cartilage. So again, it's about optimizing performance, playing safe, either rehabilitation, or it's better to use prehab instead of rehab, preparing connective tissues, muscles, your cardiovascular system, etc. Everything is going to be governed by basically Newton's laws of motion, law of gravity, other equations and laws related to physics, so that either can help us to understand adaptation of tissues or what happens when we're moving. So we want to minimize chronic disease, optimize physical fitness, aid development and preservation of brain and cognitive function, while improving our ability to be able to do well at tasks. So applications, what's in it for you in your area, whether you're interested in teaching or coaching, developing and looking at the limitations of students, how to get better, how to play and have fun, really. That's what it's all about. Adult fitness, to try to make sure people's health improves, strength, endurance, reducing risk of chronic diseases, arthritis, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, Alzheimer's, cardiovascular disease, heart disease, etc. If you're in athletic training, sports medicine becomes critically important. A lot of that's dependent on biomechanics. So triage of sports injuries, rehabilitation, conditioning, prevention. So the athletic training is often the most direct conduit between the athlete and sports medicine. Rehabilitation can take place in a number of different means. It could be physical rehabilitation, which is usually accomplished by a physical therapist. If it's cardiac rehabilitation, so someone either has been diagnosed with cardiovascular disease, could even have had a heart attack, or maybe they've had a stent put in because of an angiogram, they're going to try to prevent disease and rehabilitate that heart. In addition, when people have heart disease, the effect is not only in the heart, it's systemic, it's in the muscles and in the periphery as well. So in a lot of cardiac rehab, the adaptations are peripheral as well as central. So it truly is, or heart disease truly is a systemic whole body disease. It just doesn't affect the heart. And in fact, the limiting factor is often in your muscles, believe it or not, because it changes blood flow and the construction of micro vessels that are in your muscles and in your heart. Okay, so lots of applications, as I mentioned, lots of fields. Physical therapy, a lot of people are interested in being a physical therapist, maybe PT aide, assistant. There's something in there for everyone. This is a fast growing field. It's a good place to be. In fact, I think this probably, besides orthopedics, this has the greatest overlap with sports medicine. And for a lot of what we're going to talk about in the class, especially as time goes on and we talk about tendons, ligaments, cartilage. So rehabilitation, rehab after surgery, orthopedic injuries, they're starting to get into more prevention today and understanding how exercise prevents injuries. Occupational therapy. Here's where we're relearning the basic tasks of daily living. Someone could have been in a car accident, for example, or maybe you've had a stroke, and they're just trying to basically get back to doing the normal things they would do every day, from eating, preparing food, going to the grocery store, maybe driving, etc. Also for our soldiers who may have been overseas in maybe Afghanistan or Iraq or elsewhere and have been injured and either have prosthesis, or maybe they've had head injury, or possibly an orthopedic injury that limits their function. So getting used to moving your parts again, and sometimes there are parts that have been added on, if you will. Today we actually have the first brain control arm and leg prostheses. So that's pretty exciting. So the body will be able to control these things much better than we can right now. So here's in the U.S. Army, the occupational therapist there, or the Navy, I'm sorry. Understanding health maintenance and the rehabilitative process, and doing surgery is needed. So in medicine and orthopedics, that's what that's about. Orthopedics is actually a branch of surgery. So whether it's diagnosing the severity of a sprain using an MRI, or actually doing surgery like ACL graft surgery, where you replace usually the middle third of the patella tendon with into what used to be an ACL. And with that patella tendon, there's usually a bit of bone from the patella and from the tibia. So that's a really good way of replacing a torn ACL. If it's been partially torn, or there's a mild or class 1 sprain, then we probably won't replace it. But with a class 3 or a full tear, a graft is usually the way to go. So whether we're dealing with arthritis, this is a reminder, joint and bone related injuries are really the #1 reason people go to see a physician. Overall weakness is another reason that people go to see a physician. So your muscles, tendons, ligaments, cartilage, bones, they're really the main reason people go. People don't go as often for type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, other things. We probably should, but we don't for the most part. And orthopedic related problems are the number one reason for disability still today. So remember that as well. Nursing. So nurses are always hands-on. There, as you know, today, especially with the COVID virus, they are on, basically, they are soldiers in action in our wars against disease. So nursing is incredibly important. Outdoor education, if you're interested in that, that will be really exciting. I think this is in Colorado, great place to be in the summer. I think we all wish we could be there right now, because if it's July, it's going to be 95, 100 degrees. Hey, there may be some research in your future. So think about graduate school. This is actually a good time for it. We have researchers here who are interested in aging, osteoporosis, Parkinson's, exercise training, sedentary lifestyle, type 2 diabetes, obesity, muscular dystrophy, space flight. Get involved. As an undergraduate student, if you want to go to graduate school here as well, we'd love to see you. So in terms of biomechanics, because it's an applied science, it's really about problem solving in the end. So Albert Einstein, there's a lot of famous quotes from him. This is one of them. He said, your mind should be a place where you work things out, not just store a bunch of stuff. We got computers for that. So what we hope is that with training, that your mind will be something that can help to solve not only the problems of today, but the problems of tomorrow. And so you're our future. You're our future applied scientists. So get on board. If you're here in the summer, things move kind of fast. So keep up every day. You can't really cram for this class. You take it piece by piece. The class is designed so we build the foundation, and then everything is built so it's on that foundation safely. And so in a moment, we're going to kind of jump right into it and talk about a little bit more about the background, how biomechanics was formed, what it means, who are some of the problem solvers. Here's someone with a vertical leap. You can tell his head is out of the frame. We didn't expect him to jump this high from standing. That's about a 36-inch vertical leap, folks. That's pretty high from standing, especially when you have your cap on backwards. So anatomy, physiology, mechanics, the three sciences we put together and integrate in terms of biomechanics. And in physiology, we're going to branch out and include cell physiology as well as molecular biology. Those tools have really helped us to understand how a cell in a tendon, a ligament, a bone, or cartilage, how it detects changes in mechanical stress. And Trixie now sees some action outside, some folks walking by. Sit, Trixie, it's okay. It's okay. Here we go. So statics and dynamics, we're going to use both of these branches of mechanics and apply them to understanding how the human body works during exercise and how we can use exercise in terms of prevention, in terms of rehabilitation, especially with orthopedic injuries in sports medicine. So if you like pictures, and I know I do, anatomy, physiology, mechanics, we're going to integrate them together in this broad field of biomechanics. Exercise biomechanics is going to infuse some sports medicine, and it's also going to have some applications relating to performance. One of the advantages we have is hundreds, if not thousands of years of human engineering, whether it's civil, electrical, biomedical, mechanical, etc., in understanding how machines work. This helps us to understand how the body works when we integrate structure in terms of the cells and tissues and whole body into function. So we're going to think about the body as a mechanical machine, not quite the same way we think of a bot or a robot, but keep in mind, we have actually a lot of advantages over bots and human-made machines. Um, the one advantage they're susceptible to viruses too, different kind of virus than we're susceptible right now. And in time, we'll have vaccines, and we can put this virus behind us. Sometimes the viruses that invade PCs and even Macs and machines, they're harder to get rid of sometimes. But hang in there. Hopefully, we'll do well in the next few months as we continue to use our masks and social distancing and contact tracing to make sure that we keep people as safe as possible while still being able to do our job. So it's going to be exciting and challenging time. I think what it's going to lead to are new technologies that are going to help us in everyday function. So comparing a human and machine, or human-made machine and a human machines always wear out. With more we use the human machine, the more it's going to wear out. So the more miles you put on a car or truck, the closer those pistons are to wearing out, electronic parts going bad, other mechanical parts and steering, etc., they're going to go bad. Then you have to replace them with new ones. So I got lucky. I found I had an air conditioning problem a few months ago, and found that fortunately it was just an electronic relay. That was the problem. I was able to replace that. It cost me literally like $10 at AutoZone instead of like $1,000 replacing the compressor. That wouldn't have been a good thing. A lot of human-made machines are only designed for a limited number of purposes. They don't multitask quite as well as humans do. So IBM, way back in the 90s, developed Deep Blue. That was a big supercomputer. One of the things it learned how to do was play chess against master Gary Kasparov in 1997, and beat him 2-1 with 3 ties. There's a rematch in the 21st century, but Gary Kasparov, I think, gave up after a few games because Deep Blue had the best of him. Deep Blue was so good that NASA and NOAA decided to use it to predict weather. And we need supercomputers for models, but Deep Blue had some problems right off the bat. The first storm that it tried to predict was what we call a nor'easter, and they come off the East Coast in the winter. And because low pressures basically circulate in a counterclockwise direction, that meant that the wind comes off the coast from the northeast, and so that's where they get the name a nor'easter. So nor'easters, depending upon what time of what part of the winter, how cold it is, how far the low is off of the coast, can generate just rain or ice or snow. It could be 3 inches or 30 inches. So Deep Blue predicted 3 inches with its first storm. I think it was the beginning of February, about 1998, and it was 30 inches instead. So a lot of people got caught and weren't happy with the forecast. Models in weather are getting better today, but still weather is incredibly complex. It's very difficult to be able to predict day to day exactly what happens. Our models are pretty good today within the 3-day range to 5-day range. Anything from a week on out is just guesswork. The human-made machine, though, we have a lot of advantages. We can improve with these. That's why exercise training can enhance strength, and not only muscles, but bones, tendons, ligaments, cartilage. All of them can get stronger. They can get tougher, less likely to get damaged. We can repair ourselves within limits. Exercise during rehabilitation is an important part of that. That's one of the big parts of the first revolution in biomechanics. So if it's a joint sprain or a muscle soreness or tendonitis, or maybe a green stick fracture, our body can kind of handle that. We need some help sometimes from surgeons and physical therapists and occupational therapists and physicians for different types of injuries. We're capable of learning lots of different things, including how to pole vault. This is really difficult. I tried to do this a couple of times. I used to wrestle, so I figured I could bend the pole. It'd be a pretty piece of cake. It's not. It's incredibly difficult. But if I'd stuck with it, I probably would have learned how to do it. So there are lots of things that we can do. If you like music, you probably found that, maybe you like to play the trumpet better, or maybe it's a guitar, or maybe a keyboard or piano. And sometimes some people are able to play a number of different instruments. So we're going to actually take a look in terms of the human machine at a Downs patient, a golfer who made a par on the very famous Phoenix Open 16th hole. So this 16th hole actually has this huge stadium, and the Phoenix Open, sometimes forgot the manufacturer, I think it's Waste Management. It's takes place, and hopefully it'll take place this next year, 2021, during Super Bowl weekend. And so the crowd's pretty raucous, but you're going to see they enjoy this. So here's a Downs patient. I'm going to have to go to, as they used to say, the videotape, but today it'll be YouTube. So I'm going to pause for just a second.
How are you? Are you Amy?
Yes.
Give me a hug.
Okay, we're back.
Gary. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you
I hear you're a good golfer.
That's Gary Woodland, who I think is the
Yes.
Come on,
PGA
let's go.
champion from the
Amy.
last time we played the
Nice
PGA.
to meet you.
Nice to meet you. You're an active player.
Yes.
Awesome. You want to hit a shot?
Yes.
You do?
Yes.
All right, let's do it.
Oh.
Yeah, a bit of a crowd there.
What's your golf shoes? We got your clubs right here.
And many of them have had a lot of beverages, so they get pretty loud. So this 16th hole, this stadium's gotten larger and larger just about every year.
See the flag right in the middle?
Yes.
A lot of pressure.
Yeah, I got this.
Nice follow through.
Give me a 5.
All right, the crowd's receptive. That's good.
So cool. They love me. Awesome. Awesome.
You like all these people?
Yes.
You want to hit it out?
Yeah.
You do?
Yes, I do.
Let's do it.
I got this.
I love it.
We can do this. We can do this.
Oh, I'm the sand trap. That's really good.
That is awesome. That is awesome. Let's go. Let's go putt. We're going to make this.
Yeah.
That is so good.
Thank you.
So regardless of the obstacles, we got a lot in front of us right now. Humans can do a lot of stuff. We can do anything. If we have a
Go ahead
plan,
and make that.
that's one of the critical aspects I think we're
got
learning
this.
right now.
Got it?
Yeah.
Good plan. Good plans always get us towards a target, and boom, there we go.
That is so awesome. Yes. You are so awesome.
Thank you.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, we're back, and one of the critical aspects of biomechanics and being able to use applied science is really problem solving. And if you think about it, that's what a physician, a physical therapist, a coach, a teacher, occupational therapist, nurse, etc., athletic trainer, that's what we're doing most of the time. We're solving problems. Humans are pretty good at that, or we wouldn't be here. We solve lots of problems over the years in terms of how we can grow food, how we can build shelter, etc. And we've been able to pass down that information. And science is one of the best ways, in fact, if not the best way, to pass down information. Because one of the things about science, it's really a living creature. We're constantly renewing, we're constantly trying to make things better. So it's like technology. How can we make things better? So a great example, got a couple of golf clubs here. There we go. This one, this is actually my grandfather's. This is a persimmon wood, when woods were really made of wood. This is from the 1960s or 1970s, I think. So it's hard, it's heavy, it's stiff, but it's elastic recoil. It's Its ability to be able to store potential energy, spring energy, and return it to the golf ball isn't quite as good. Its elasticity, partly, if you will, is not nearly as good as a club today. So I should contrast these so you can see the difference in the size of those heads. Man, this is massive. This looks like a guppy over here. This looks like a big killer whale or something. Oh my gosh. So the size is also important because a lot of the mass of this head is spread away from the center and gives it a large sweet spot by increasing what we call the moment of inertia. It's also a lot lighter. There is a titanium shell on the outside and then a foam core on the inside. So this redesign using technology to try to improve things. We also see this in prosthetics today, artificial knees, artificial hips. In fact, catch those, Trixie. Okay, I'll let Trixie take care of that. So critical thinking. So it's about asking questions, solving problems. How do muscles create movement at joints? It's going to be torque. How are running shoes designed to reduce injury, improve running performance? We're going to talk about concepts like cushioning, the ability to reduce impact forces, and recoil, the ability to be able to store elastic force and turn some of that elastic energy into kinetic energy of movement. How does joint cartilage act as a shock absorber? Does genetics play a role in muscle power? It certainly does. Muscle fiber type is a critical aspect of that. How we can design better prosthetics like an artificial knee. How back in the day, how could you hit a lot of home runs? Some of it was weightlifting, some was a little help. So we'll talk about ergogenic aids, both the legal and especially the illegal ones, whether it was growth hormone or anabolic steroids, and how they actually work to increase muscle mass and force and power, so that instead of hitting 61 home runs, you could hit 70 or 73, etc. A critical concept is torque, the ability to cause rotation. And applying this really is critical in a lot of different sports, including football. So we're going to see how offensive linemen use torque to be able to push and to be able to overcome that defender. So we're going to move to a video. That means I'm going to pause just for a second and then readjust. So back in a second. Okay, here we go. Torque application in football. This is from the National Science Foundation in coordination with the NFL.
In a game played by big men, NFL offensive linemen are some of the biggest of all. Whether they're blocking for a running back or protecting the quarterback, these giants of the O-line know how to use size to their advantage.
Man, there's some big guys that play in the NFL, especially on the defensive line. So
Landon
sometimes
Pace,
these big guys just hitting.
recently got into the NFL Hall of Fame.
And low man really wins.
Who wins the battle of the gridiron Goliaths? According to the laws of physics, it's the player who stays the lowest and masters the concept of torque, which is the tendency of a force to make an object rotate around an axis.
A torque is anything that causes another object to spin.
So it means it's an off-center force. So here we see a physics professor. You know he's a really good physics professor if he's in the basement, where if he has an experiment, it goes wrong, no one gets hurt, everything's cool.
In the NFL, we see torque whenever one player collides with another, causing him to rotate or spin. What's key is the distance of the force from the rotation axis.
So when you're producing torque on an object, so for example, when the hip abductors tug on the femur and cause rotation, they're introducing what we call an off-center force. that force is created some distance away from the axis of rotation. So the combination of the magnitude of the force, and that means times, the distance from which the force is applied to the axis of rotation, that's what produces force. So it's force, and then how far that force is being produced away from the axis of rotation.
This distance is called a lever or moment arm.
So
So a lever is a rigid bar-like body that can rotate about an axis. Our skeleton is full of lever systems. So a lever is one of the, what we would call simple machines that the body uses to try to get around.
where the force is applied to an object determines whether there's a torque. If I hit dead on, no torque. If I hit a little bit to the side and cause spinning, I have a torque.
To counter the rotational force, coaches at all levels teach players to stay as low as possible.
Get low now, get low, let's get low, get low.
Tony Schmitz is a former Division I college football player and currently a coach for the Newberry High School football team. But as a mechanical and aerospace engineer at the University of Florida, he understands the physics behind staying low.
Okay, so we have a coach who's a rocket scientist. That's pretty good. And that means he's also a physics person, and that means he's also in the basement.
Coaches often talk
There we
to
go.
players about staying low, and there's different phrases they use, like the low man wins. Because if I can have my center of mass low and exert my force against somebody with their center of mass high, I'm more likely to push that person over and win the bout.
A player's center of mass, often referred to as their center of gravity, is the point on a body where mass is most concentrated.
So the center of mass is the average location of mass for any body. For a lineman, for example, that center of mass is usually somewhere near the navel.
When a player crouches, his center of mass is lower.
And that's one reason you want to stay low. Because if you're low, you're taking advantage of the laws of physics that says that if you can't get to my center of mass, it's hard for you to make me rotate.
The other advantage is that it allows the muscles that produce hip extension, like the gluteus maximus and the hamstrings, the quadriceps, which are the knee extensors, the plantar flexors, the gastrocnemius, plantaris, soleus muscles. It actually stretches these muscles so they can produce more force, and also puts the joints in a position where those muscles can actually produce more torque. And therefore, you'll be able to jump or move faster and with more power.
Low man wins on this one. That's the key.
Consider Orlando Pace, 7-time Pro Bowl offensive tackle with the St. Louis Rams, who stands 6'7", 325 pounds. His center of mass is located just above his hips. By crouching, Pace not only lowers his center of mass, but he's now in a position to impart a bigger torque because he's able to hit upward on his opponent.
By hitting on
Right there. Okay. So by hitting upward, meaning we start low, and that force vector goes up and hits the person high. So that means that this is our axis of rotation at the feet. This is our distance away from where the force is applied to the axis of rotation. We've maximized this distance, which means we maximize the torque. So it's more likely to be able to push that defender over.
On his opponent.
By hitting on the rise, we can actually increase the torque that we apply to a body because as we start low, there's a low moment arm from where we apply the force to the ground. But as we get higher, that moment arm increases and we're applying more torque.
As Pace rises from the crouch position, the distance between his opponent's pivot point and the location where Pace applies the force increases, allowing him to impart a higher torque on his opponent.
To move a guy off the line against his will is probably the biggest success as an offensive lineman you can do, because that guy's trying to come forward, you're moving him back. As an offensive lineman, that's our touchdown.
And in a game where the low man wins, that success comes one push at a time.
Okay. Let's pause this for a second. Sorry, hit the wrong button. So that video really, again, hits home with cause and effect. We're thinking about critical thinking, how we can use critical thinking and causal analysis to be able to come up with solutions to our problems. So again, problem solving part is critically important. So using kinetics, understanding the principle of torque and how that occurs. So when a muscle is pulling on a bone, for example, which is a lever, the distance from the muscle's insertion to the middle of a joint would be its moment arm or its lever arm. And then we combine that force and that distance, that gives us torque. Here we go. So lots of questions we'll talk about. Why are rotator cuff injuries really common in swimmers? And that's because the rotator cuff tendons, like from the supraspinatus, get caught between the head of the humerus and the glenoid fossa. So that glenoid fossa is important because it's an indentation in which the head of the humerus fits in. It also, we have an Okerlund process that's on top of the glenoid fossa that can basically get squeezed, or the tendon can get squeezed between the head of the humerus and that Okerlund process. So we'll also talk about why does a curveball curve, why do joint sprains often take so long to heal, why are bone fractures common in the elderly. They're also fairly common in young people as well. And we'll talk about some of those mechanical differences. Okay, so we'll finish up today and talk about some of the problem solvers historically in biomechanics, where this came from, and then who are the leaders today. These are names, especially when we get into kind of the leaders, early leaders and giants of modern biomechanics. They should be as famous as Steve Jobs and Bill Gates because they've helped to revolutionize sports medicine. So we'll talk about why that's so important, because back in the day, sports medicine was a scary, scary thing. So in terms of biomechanics, problem solvers, Aristotle lived from 382 to 322 BC. He was a student of Plato, founded his own school. He's sometimes thought of as the father of natural sciences. He and his students wrote extensively on philosophy, politics, logic, natural sciences, physics. A lot of the complete works were lost either in Alexandria, Egypt, or in Greece, but we do have a lot of his class notes and some of the work that actually his students did, believe it or not. So he and his students pictured the body as a machine. Muscles cause an action, which produces movement. So Galen, who's a famous physician in Greece, took these principles and expanded upon them, and they helped to train like Olympic athletes, etc. So we'll skip the Dark Ages and talk about the Renaissance and Leonardo da Vinci, very famous artist, painted the Mona Lisa. The Last Supper, was also a scientist, had access to lots of cadavers because he worked for the military, and that gave him the opportunity to be able to draw origins and insertions for all 600 plus muscles design of the human skeleton. So a lot of what you see in literally a Gray's Anatomy, those drawings, those pictures came in essence from Leonardo da Vinci. The father of modern biomechanics is Giovanni Borelli. So Borelli lived in the 17th century. He was a professor of mathematics at University of Messina, and he expanded on Aristotle's work in terms of how muscles, bones, and joints worked, and added in the mathematics where we could make this a predictable phenomenon. He also was important in cardiovascular mechanics as well, and expanded, as I said, on Aristotle's work. Isaac Newton provided the mathematical and physical foundation for biomechanics as well as physics, came up with the laws of motion, the law of gravity, action is spare time, helped to invent calculus, which is a type of mathematics, which helps to connect things like distance, velocity, acceleration, force, torque, momentum, impulse, energy, work, etc., power. Founded the Royal Academy of Sciences, which is the longest running scientific group. Despite his contributions in science, Newton's primary investigations were done as a graduate student, kind of in his spare time. In fact, both Isaac Newton and Einstein were actually board graduate students, believe it or not. And in fact, I think Einstein got rid of his first mentor in graduate school. And the year he got his PhD was actually the year he came up with, in his spare time, and his separate papers, the E equals MC squared, relativity, etc. So pretty amazing. So both Newton and Einstein, part-timers in science, who came up with probably the two most famous equations in physics. Force is equal to mass times acceleration. That's from Newton's second law. That's the law of acceleration. And then E equals MC squared. So pretty amazing. Thomas Edison. Technology, as I mentioned, is a critical part of biomechanics. So here we're taking everything that's been learned from Borelli and Aristotle and Isaac Newton, and actually making measurements so we can take what Isaac Newton observed and came up with and actually demonstrate it from a scientific standpoint. We need technology to do these types of measurements in biomechanics. So Edison is really the true audio-visual guy, is AV guy. So he came up with both audio and video. So let's talk about that. As you probably know, came up with over 1,000 inventions. He had a research team working with him. It wasn't just him in the laboratory by himself. As you know, he invented the electric light bulb after 101 different tries. The voice transmitter, the power amp. Power amp actually hasn't changed very much. Believe it or not, a good power amp that they might use in a band, country band or a rock band, where you plug in a guitar, especially if they have like the old school vacuum tubes. They sometimes have those in the really big amplifiers. Edison was trying to invent the telephone, and Alexander Graham Bell just beat him out. He's really furious about that. So he said, darn. Well, then he said, well, you know, most people, this was back in, you know, the 1880s. Most people are out in their farm. They're out working. Some are in a factory. They're not going to be home answering the phone. So I'll have an answering machine. He decided to invent that. But people really weren't interested in that either. It's only when he turned the answer machine into something called a phonograph, which at first was actually just a wax tube and then eventually became a disc. So maybe your parents have a phonograph player, even though they're starting to come back a little bit now, to play some music. So he was interested in doing that and recording, and also invented motion pictures. It's a guy named Muybridge that he worked with to take video pictures of a horse galloping. And they used a roll of film called a kinetoscope to do that. Here's a nice quote from Edison: genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. Yeah, that's true, especially in the summer here in Texas. So he invented audio, he invented video, eventually in movies that came together, but it wasn't until the 1920s. And he also, well, he wanted to make some money off of his inventions. So General Electric, GE, was the company that he and his group founded way back in the day. Computers became critical, especially with miniaturization, with transistors in the 1940s. Before that, computers had lots of vacuum tubes, just like power amps. and the transistor became more common in the 1960s. You could see them in radios that you could hold up to your ear. Also, they helped to form microcomputers. NASA first started to invent many of those microcomputers in the 1960s. They really weren't that powerful then, but powerful enough to communicate with astronauts in space and to be able to regulate the function of spacecrafts. In the 1970s, we started to use microcomputers in research more, including biomechanics. We're going to look at one of the individuals we're going to look at either in a few minutes or in the next phase is Peter Cavanaugh. And Peter Cavanaugh used computers in research at Penn State to be able to focus on gait analysis, how people run and walk, and how we should design, better running shoes. In the 1980s and beyond, computers started to become more widespread. So with computers, we can basically collect lots of data really fast, especially with digital video. So what might have taken literally 2 or 3 years to collect in terms of data can take us a few weeks to maybe a month or two. So huge savings. So digital video starting in the 1990s, digital video cameras, which are really easy to hook up to computers. We have video analysis programs like Dartfish that we're going to use in our laboratory, and scientists have used to be able to analyze everything from a Tiger Woods golf swing to maybe a patient who's recovering from stroke. So because of technology and putting things together, exercise biomechanics is now only reaching its maturity. It's really just getting rolling. So with digital video analysis, computers, the tools of cell and molecular biology, we can now focus on doing research and applying that research, whether we're looking at treating arthritis or preventing an orthopedic injury, or maybe improving performance of a tennis player, or maybe designing a better tennis racket with a large sweet spot like we have today. So this is a nice big Wilson tennis racket that we might use today. So this is the product of literally decades of research and technology development. So that's going to be a focus of the class. And that means everything from gait analysis to the development of hydrogels. That's basically like gummy bears or Jell-O that use proteins and sometimes natural and sometimes man-made polymers that can store a lot of water. They can store medicines, they can store stem cells, they can store growth factors, etc., that are going to allow us to be able to enhance the healing that we see after an orthopedic injury, or can even replace a tissue that's been lost. We can replace parts of skeletal muscle, parts of a tendon, ligament, cartilage. A lot of this work is in the experimental stage, but we hope in the next decade or two, we'll be able to apply it to real humans. So orthopedic medicine has really benefited from rehabilitation and arthroscopic surgery. Things have changed a lot, which is really important in problem solving, is that you do actually solve some problems. You do improve technology and our ability to be able to treat folks. So we have better artificial hips and knees, better support devices, synthetic replacements for structural tissue, whether it's cartilage or a lower leg. So there's lots of applications in terms of problem solving. It could be exercise training and rehabilitation, reducing bone loss and muscle mass, and changes in the cardiovascular system that happen with space flight. How to keep astronauts in good shape for that eventual flight to Mars, we hope in the next decade or so. How do we reduce atrophy in skeletal muscle with new exercise machines? And maybe some drugs along with that. How we design better running shoes and exercise equipment like Cybex, Nautilus equipment, better football helmets that might reduce head injuries. That's going to be a critical thing. So I think we're actually going to stop right here. There we go. And we're going to be looking into the future by understanding the pioneers who are able to take these new tools in cell biology, molecular biology, digital video analysis, force and pressure plates, our ability to be able to measure material properties or mechanical strength and stiffness and toughness. So the use of that technology and the folks who are part of the first revolution and what's coming up now, the second revolution in sports medicine, that's what we're going to focus on next time when we start with problem solvers. And then we're going to look at the problem solving process. You guys, remember, are going to be the problem solvers of the future. So with great excitement, I'm going to tip you off literally. This is Charlie Tipton on the right side. This person behind him and to the left is Savio Wu. I think this is at an award ceremony for Savio Wu. These folks revolutionized sports medicine and are the reason that you don't get casted after you've had a severe knee or elbow injury, and why part of the reason why rehabilitation today involves range of motion exercises and active exercises that are designed to improve function. Okay, so with that, I think we're done with part 1 or episode 1 of Exercise Biomechanics. We'll see you again really, really soon. Problem solving and problem solvers will be the subject of part 2. You guys have a great day, great afternoon or evening.